Hi, this is Craig Stocks here at Utah Desert Remote Observatories. You can find us online at utahdesertremote.com. And I had a request the other day to show more one-shot color processing. So today we're going to work with this image of the Veil Nebula that was captured with a one-shot color camera with a combination of a clear glass and an Optolong L-Enhance filter. And we'll process it briefly in PixInsight and then hop into Photoshop. Let's start in PixInsight, and this is the way I configured the WBPP process to process these images. First of all, here are the light frames. Now, there's not much data here, and this was captured last night under a full moon, so it's not the greatest data, but it's good enough to use as an example. And then likewise, I have flats, darks, and biases. And then on the calibration tab, there's a couple things you need to do for one-shot color. For the flats, we need to let WBPP know that these are color images, so we check the CFA, which stands for Color Filter Array, and it's that color filter array on the sensor that makes it a color camera. And then also apply to all flats, and what that means is apply it to both rows, both the L-Enhance and the Luminance. And what I'm calling Luminance was just taken through a clear glass filter. The reason for that is if that slot in the filter wheel is empty, the focus between having an L-Enhance filter and no filter, the focus difference is just too great because the thickness of the glass changes the focus point. So having a clear glass filter in there keeps it's not exactly parfocal, it still has to be focused, but it's close enough to in focus that the autofocus can handle it. And then for the lights, again, we have to tell it that these are CFA images, and in this case the mosaic pattern is RGGB, and then apply to all light frames, and that applies it to both the L-Enhance and the Luminance as well, so you don't have to go through that for each row of data. And then I've set a swap output directory, which I just use a working directly. And at this point, that's ready to go. So you would click Run, and after it's done, if we go look in the output directory in the Masters folder, we'll find these two files. This is the L-Enhance and the Luminance. I already have these open. And if I open the screen transfer function window, I can apply the screen transfer function to both the L-Enhance and the Luminance. And it's pretty typical that you start out with a strong color cast. Basically, these go through my usual processing steps. Historically, I don't like to crop, but I also don't like to click buttons over and over and over. So I use image containers a lot. So in this case, I would right-click on the background, choose Image Container, and that brings up the Image Container window where I can choose views to add, and the views I want are these first two. Click OK. And so now my image container lists these two images, and for instance, now I can run Graxpert by just dragging the triangle from this image container window onto the Graxpert process icon, and I just have saved these process icons in a blank project, so when I start PixInsight I load these, and if I run Graxpert on this image by its initially, you can see this dark area where some of the images didn't align correctly. That'll probably leave a glow along the bottom where Graxpert won't work correctly. You can see what I mean? So the solution to that unfortunately means that these need to be cropped. And so that means that we'll use the dynamic crop tool. And I'll start with this one. I'll go to Process, All Processes, Dynamic Crop, and just choose a crop rectangle that avoids all of those edge artifacts. And now I want to apply this crop to the luminosity or luminance image, and then I'll come back to this one and apply the crop. So now I've cropped both of these images the same, so they will still register correctly. Now I can apply Graxpert, and because I have cleaned up that edge artifact, it will apply the way you expect it to without that glow along the bottom edge. So I don't like cropping. I also don't like having to run Graxpert individually one at a time. I would rather run it from an image container and let PixInsight do the work while I go off and get a cup of coffee or check my email or do whatever. So now Graxpert has finished. From this point on, it's pretty standard processing, and I just work my way down the icons. I would run Blur Exterminator in correct only mode, and again I would run that from the image container to correct the stars. Then I would run one-shot color calibration. Now since I cropped, I'll have to do an image solve on each one of these images to get the astrometric solution back. Then I can run the spectrophotometric color calibration, Blur Exterminator to sharpen the nebula, and then I'll use just the histogram transformation and stretch each one of these images. And I usually modify the stretch just a little bit from the standard screen transfer function. So I will do a screen transfer function and then zoom in to the sliders so that I can see the dark slider. And usually I'll make the darks a little darker and the lights a little lighter to get just a little bit more contrast, and then apply that. Now on this one, I actually want two versions of this. I want the RGB version with a pretty standard stretch. I'll darken it just a little bit, but I also want to darken the stars quite a bit. So I'm just going to right click and choose duplicate to create a duplicate image. And now when I stretch this image, I'm going to darken it quite a bit to reduce the size of the stars, but then I will lighten the background so that it's not black, and that helps retain the color in the halo around the star. And then apply that to the cloned version, and then to the non-cloned version I'll apply a more normal stretch where I'll darken the background slightly, brighten the nebula a little bit, and then apply that. My last step is to add that clone to the image container, which I would just click on the Add Views and add the cloned image to the list. And then I would run those through a process container that includes both the noise exterminator and star exterminator configured to save the unscreened stars. And when that's done, I then have the images that I need for Photoshop. And just to take a quick look at those. So these are the raw files. These are the ones that will actually save as 16-bit TIFFs. So there's the RGB background, the luminance RGB. And you'll notice now that we've removed the stars, you can see a couple of airplane or satellite trails through the image. We've got a little flare here in the corner. And we've got a fairly significant dust mote right here in the middle. Here's the L-Enhance version, a little bit cleaner, and it has more detail. And then lastly, the stars that were extracted from the darkened or cloned image. So these three get saved, and with that we are ready to go into Photoshop and start actually assembling and processing the image. So in Photoshop, I'll choose File, Scripts, Load Files into Stack, and that brings up this window where I can browse for the three files that we just saved. And those are going to be in my Astro folder under the Eastern Veil. And there's the luminance, the L-enhance, and one of these is there's the cloned stars, so those 3 files. Click OK to add them to the list, and then OK to tell Photoshop we want to open these files as layers. And there they are. There's the RGB luminance, there's the L-enhance, and there's the stars. So just quickly do some housekeeping. I'll move the stars to the top. Control G to drop that layer into a group. Change the group name to stars. Change the group blending mode to screen. And now we see the stars on top of the next layer below it. And I'll just collapse and turn off that layer for now with the eyeball. This is the L-enhance, or I'm sorry, the luminance, and this one needs a little bit of work. We've got the dust mote down here in the satellite trails. We're going to deal with these a couple different ways. I'll start with the satellite trails. Now, the proper way to do this is to create a new layer, grab the remove tool, and choose sample all layers. And when you do this, it's important that you don't have any other layers turned on above it. But now we can, and I've also checked or I have not checked remove after each stroke. What that lets me do is with a small brush, click at one end of this satellite trail, come down here, hold the Shift key, and click at the other end. And Photoshop will use that tool to draw a line between those 2 points. We also have a satellite trail here, so I can click, come down here, and Shift click at the other end. And then now I'll just press Enter or click the check mark, and that will run the remove tool, and it's going to put the corrections on this blank layer since that's the currently selected layer. And we can turn that layer on and off to see the difference. It looks like it missed part of it here, so we'll pick that up and see if we can make that a little bit better. And then I can make the brush larger and then just paint over this lens flare at the top. Press Enter. Now to clean up this artifact around a star and the dust mote, we're going to add another blank layer, and this one we're going to put in soft light blending mode. And the reason we're doing this is we don't want to use the remove tool or a clone stamp or anything like that to try to fix this dust mote, because there is detail under here and we don't want to change the detail. And if I tried to use the remove tool to remove this dust mote, it would create texture underneath it, but it wouldn't be the same texture that's there. And we want to try to preserve the detail that's actually there. The problem is that this area is just too dark and we just need to lighten it. So to lighten it, I've got a layer, a blank layer in soft light blending mode. And I'm going to grab my brush tool by tapping the B. And I'll go to a fairly low opacity of something like 10% to start with. And I got to that 10% by just tapping the 1 key. I'll use the left bracket key to make the brush smaller. And I'll just tap X now to change white to the foreground. And I'll just go around this circle once. I'll go around the circle again. And you can see it's starting to blend in. So at this point, I'll make the brush a little smaller, fine-tune this area, and I'll probably need to reduce the opacity down to 5%, which I get by tapping 0.5 on the keyboard. Make the brush even smaller, and start working on these small areas. And if I need to darken an area back down, I'll just tap the X key. Now I can turn this layer off and on. And sometimes when you do that, you'll see that some areas maybe have gone a little too far. Darken that back down. And that looks pretty good. The dust mote has disappeared, and we've restored the underlying detail. I could spend a little bit more time on this and fine tune it, but we'll say that's good enough for now. And then for the star up here, I'll do the same thing, and I'll just keep clicking with a dark brush to blend that glow from the big star up here into the background. Now, there's probably some other areas that we'll work on, but we'll work on those once we have the image kind of semi-processed so we can see better the effect that we're having. So we're done with the RGB. I'll turn that layer off. We'll come to the L-Enhance again, Control-G, change the name. I don't see anything I need the remove tool for, but we probably will use the burning and dodging, especially up here in this corner, possibly down here, possibly in this area. I've got a feeling this is glow rather than actual data. The first thing I want to do is set a black level to kind of start to neutralize the color cast. It looks like there's kind of a red or cyan tone in the background. So to do that, I'm going to do a couple things. First, I'm going to start above the RGB and below the stars, and I'm going to add a solid fill layer in. Here we go, solid color, and I want it to be black, and I'm going to put it in divide blending mode, and so the whole image turns white. Now I'm going to come back down to my L-Enhance data, and I'm going to add a levels adjustment layer right on top, and it can be within the group. And what I want to do is find the darkest meaningful area of this image, and I'm going to do that by moving the black slider into the right, which is effectively darkening what we see of the L-Enhance to the point that it turns black. And once I find the area that's turning black first, and I say a meaningful area, and I think that's going to be this area up here. So I'll come over to the eyedropper tool, click and hold so I can choose the color sampler. This is 11 by 11 for a sample size. Come in here and click, and that creates a sample point. Now I can turn off that layer and reset the levels, and I'm going to change the levels adjustment layer name to black level. And what we want to look at are the color values in the info palette. And right now you can see it's red 34, green 39, blue 37, so fairly close to neutral, but they're brighter than I want. I want them to be around RGB values of 19, 19, 19. So to do that, I'm going to go channel by channel. I'll start with red this is on that levels adjustment layer, and I'm going to darken the reds to 19. Then I'll go to the greens, darken them to 19, and then to the blues, darken those to 19. And that gives me a fairly well neutralized image just by setting the black point. Now if I want to do further levels adjustments, I'll typically just add a second levels adjustment, and then that's where I would adjust the brightness and contrast. And it's not unusual when you do that. You have to, if you brighten the midtones, you'll typically have to darken the darks back down again. But that's a fairly reasonable expression of the L-Enhance layer. And now we really do see that we've got some glare going on here from the moon, some glare up here, some artifact around that star. So I'm just going to go below these levels. General rule of thumb is pixel bearing layers should be below adjustment layers. This is a burning and dodging layer, so that's not, you could go either way, but I'm going to put it below. And with black as my foreground color, I'm just going to darken down these areas in this top right. And I'm at 5, I'm going to go to 10% opacity, so this goes a little faster. Darken that star, darken this, and then this whole corner over here looks like it's got a fair amount of glare going on. This will get cleaned up even more as we work our way along. Now, if the color difference is a problem, you can always put another layer in here and put it in color blending mode. And for instance, I can sample by holding the Alt key, sample a color I like, and then paint that color to change the color. So I've got a soft light layer changing the brightness, and then a color layer changing the color. So now let's go back to our RGB layer. It has nice color, but it doesn't have, I don't think, as much detail as the L-Enhance. So here's a trick you can use that doesn't always work. Sometimes it works well. In this image, I think it works pretty well. Typically, I would combine the L-Enhance and the RGB in a lighten or a screen blending mode, so we're getting information from both. In this case, we're just going to keep the L-Enhance for the detail, and we're going to add RGB just in color mode. In other words, we're going to take the color from this RGB layer, and we're going to take the detail from the L-Enhance. So I'll just put this layer group in color blending mode, and there we have the L-Enhance data, and we can fine-tune the brightness and contrast if we want to. So all the detail is coming from the L-Enhance data. The color is coming from the RGB. Now I can go above RGB and I'll put in my usual global adjustment layers, which would be a levels adjustment layer, a color balance, a hue saturation, and then another solid color layer. In this one we're going to put in RGB values of 19, 19, 19, which is the same as 13, 13, 13 in hexadecimal. And we'll put this layer in lighten blending mode. And that will just, any place that's darker than that, it just lifts it up to a nice even dark gray. You can see we've still got some areas over here where that glare is showing. I can come back to the L-Enhance and 10% opacity, just paint that down so it disappears. I might darken this area, I might darken this corner. A lot of what's going on in the sky up here is just noise. It's not really adding any information. I'll go to the hue saturation and boost the color saturation. And that gives us a nice color balance, taking the detail from the L-Enhance and the color from RGB. Again, I think I'll darken this down a little bit because it's mostly just noise. And I said there's really not enough data here to make a good image, but it's still a good example. So now it's time to go to the stars, and this is that solid color layer that is in divide blending mode. We're done with that, so we can just delete it. I'll turn on the stars, and remember we reduced the stars in PixInsight, so they don't look bad. I think we can make them look better though. The simple approach is just to add a levels adjustment layer within the stars group, and if you darken the stars more, they will recede even more and become less dominant. Darker stars are smaller stars just because of the point spread function. We can go a little bit further. We can apply some filters to the stars, and to do that I want to turn this into a smart object. So I'll convert to a smart object. The first thing I want to do is knock out all of these little tiny stars that just look like noise. So to do that, I'm going to go to Filter, Noise, Dust and Scratches, and usually somewhere in the 3 to 6 range works well, just depending on the image and the scope and how big the stars are. Now I'm going to sharpen what's left. So I'm going to go to Filter, Sharpen, Smart Sharpen is the sharpening tool I like best. And usually I don't want to be too aggressive on the pixel size, usually somewhere in the 3 range. You can be fairly aggressive on the amount with these high resolution images. Lower resolution images, you might need to be a little bit more cautious. The last thing, and this is a new step that I've been doing, is restoring some of the glow around the stars. And to do that, I'm going to go to Filter, and this is a couple step process. Filter, Blur, Gaussian Blur, and usually somewhere in the 2 to 3 range. I'll stay at 2. Click OK. Now, since this is a smart filter, I can come back and change this at any time. But it doesn't appear to have done anything, and that's because we need to change the blending mode of this filter. Now, we can change the blending mode of just the filter by double-clicking on the little arrows over here on the right side of the smart filter, and that'll bring up blending options for that smart filter. And one of the things we can change is the blending mode, so we can go from normal to screen. And we can also change the opacity if we want to. We'll just leave it where it is, and if I turn that off and on, it'll take a few seconds to re-render, but there it is off. And if I turn it back on, watch the stars, you'll see they get fluffy again. Although since we've taken out the little stars, they don't show up. I think that's probably applied too strong, so I'm going to take the amount, blending amount from 100% down to 50%. Some people think that anytime you do an effect, you should apply the effect and then back it off by half to see if it's, because you have a tendency to do it too much. So that I think looks better. We may want to boost the saturation a little bit more. If we want to target just the cyans, we can target cyans, and we can even move this slider to include more of the blue in the cyans, and that'll let us adjust both the color and the saturation, and now we're doing that on just the blues by themselves. So that's just kind of an overall L-enhance and RGB processing. Curious how that compares to my original. Yeah, it's pretty close. I think the other thing I did in the original was take the L-enhance data, convert it to a smart object, and then apply smart sharpening to it. And in this case, Nebula usually can take a fairly aggressive amount of sharpening, at least with the ASI 6200 high-resolution cameras. And that crisps up the nebula a little bit. Since RGB is in color blending mode, it doesn't really need to be sharpened. All it's adding is color. It's the L-enhance that's adding the detail. So that's a basic processing of one-shot color data captured with a L-enhance filter and just plain RGB and RGB stars. Hope you found this useful. Some of the techniques are probably a little bit more advanced, but keep watching and you'll keep learning more. And if you have any questions, be sure to drop those in the comments down below, and I'll try to answer them as best I can. And with that, I hope you have a great day today and an even better night tonight under a clear, dark sky. Thanks.